monthly on topics of interest related to work and people analytics. Be sure to sign up for the entire series. Our next webinars are noted on the screen, August 17th and September 21st. We're very grateful that you could join us today. Thank you for making time to be here. I'm Tom West. I work with WPA conducting our training and certification programs and supporting WPA's North American partnerships. Also on the line with us from Team WPA is Stephen Smith. Stephen is an industrial organizational psychologist with a Fortune 500 HR and analytics background. And with that, I'm happy to introduce and work with Kevin Schlater, who's president of WPA North America and part of WPA's global team. Kevin has more than 25 years experience in corporate financial performance, organizational leadership, and strategic planning. So with that, Kevin, I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you to everybody for joining us this morning. So this is really one of the most exciting topics for me, and it's exciting because it is, in relative terms, a simple topic, but so extraordinarily meaningful and impactful and actionable that it's very valuable to people. So we look forward to sharing. And the very first thing we're going to do to get started is we're going to distribute our first poll question of the morning. So Stephen will start, we'll open that poll for everyone.
And while that's on screen, that poll asks, approximately what percentage of your total work hours each week do you spend away from your assigned space, meaning your desk or workstation? More than 2/3 of your time, about 1/3 of your time, and less than 1/3 of your time. We'll leave that open for just a moment. Yeah, Kevin, I think it's looking like about, well, more than 50% have chosen the first response, more than 2/3 of my time. The remaining 50%, which is shifting slightly, at least 1/3 of your time. So as we suspected, we're all working more mobilely today. And Stephen, you can close that poll question now.
Well, it's true, and that's it's interesting to see, and it is a lot of what we find with the work that we do. And it kind of goes without saying, I think, for the most part, that we are mobile. Humans are mobile. Humans always have been mobile. And there's some research on the mobile worker here that we're sharing on screen with you now. And this research, and there's research all over the place regarding this. And quite frankly, you know, there's various degrees of percentages and those types of things. This particular research came out of Deloitte. But what that really matters here is, and the important truth is that we're becoming more mobile. And we also showed that in the poll that we just took here very, very informally. So this is very important for us to understand, is that we're becoming more mobile. And this is not a webinar about the goods or the bads or the rights or the wrongs or the opportunities or the negatives with mobility. We're starting this webinar with the understanding that mobility is happening in our organizations. When we're talking about mobility, we're really talking about, in knowledge workforces, two primary kinds of mobility. We're talking really about internal mobility, or at our place of work. And almost every organization still has a primary place or places of work throughout the world. These are office settings, buildings, workspaces that they use for their organizations to interact with. At the same time, we have external mobility, and that's really being anywhere else and being able to work anywhere else. And when we look at the data of mobility, it's really good to start at that broad level and say, are we working internally or are we working externally? Oftentimes when people think about mobility, they're thinking about external mobility, such as working from a coffee shop or on an airplane or at a client or a vendor or even from home. But we need to understand that when we're talking about mobility, we're also talking about internal mobility, the ability of each of us and our teams to get up, to move around our organization, to solve problems, to create interaction, and to serve our customers.
So Kevin, that would include being in conference rooms with your laptop open, maybe being in team spaces, collaborating with others, but away from your assigned workspace internally, right?
That is correct. And those are the types of things we measure as well. And that's important. But those are internal mobility factors, and they're very important. We'll share that, and we'll show that to you as we move along here. So mobility also has consequences. Mobility has consequences because it's creating change in our organizations. And simply by people being more mobile, it creates change in the types of people, who we hire, where we hire, and how we use them. For example, we can hire people from oftentimes from almost any place now in the United States domestically or around the world for global organizations. It also creates change in how we use our technologies, where we use them. And this generally creates our desire for greater speed, accessibility, and globalization. It even allows us to sell in different markets and geographic areas that maybe we normally wouldn't have. Mobility also creates change in our places, where we work, how we collaborate, and using those places to motivate certain behaviors within our organizations. So these things are very, very important to know. And what I think probably is also helpful to know in terms of mobility is that mobility isn't usually an outcome. Mobility is often the driver in this, and it's an important thing to consider. And it's why we're going to share what we're going to share today about documenting the mobility of various teams within your organization. So while all of these things are happening, mobility is really, in essence, creating the culture in our organization, because mobility is part of a suite of behaviors that are linked to how we act, how we work, and as we said in the previous slide, the tools that we use, what we see, and how we prioritize. So mobility has a significant impact and effect on our organizations. If it has the impact on our culture and the things that we shared previously, people, technology, and place, it clearly has an impact and a direct impact on our ability to make money, to create revenue, to make money through profit, and to build value in terms of our balance sheet. These are important things to know too, and for the HR people who are on the call today, it's important to share that talking in terms of business, in terms of revenue, profit, value generation, are really the biggest metrics that an organization is really looking for. This is what the C-suite wants. This is what leaders in the organization want because it's how they're held accountable. So what we're trying to really do is make this connection between work behaviors, of which mobility is one of them and a very prominent one, and how that can produce results. Now, the information on the screen is not connected, but in our webinar last month, we shared what we use at Work and People Analytics to profile departments, teams, or organizations called a work persona. And what we need to get into the habit of doing in the human capital arena and in the human resource arena and in so many other leadership positions is to look at the financial output of the organization, which is on the right, and then share this is the team or the profit center and how they work and how they behave. And now we can tie behavior to the production of profit and financial metrics in the organization. And this is important for all of us to know.
So just maybe to pause there for a minute and say that a different way, Kevin, by virtue of how people are working today and where they're working today, you're saying that that is having a dramatic effect on the culture of the organization, their productivity, and the outputs or the results that the organizations are able to attain, whether or not they're able to carry out their strategy. Is that correct?
I think that's correct. And even a similar way to say that, Tom, is that we should be embracing the mobility, because people are moving around and doing things not because they want to do that, but because they need to do that in service of their job. People are moving around because they have to connect to a client to find information out. People are moving around because they have to share information to innovate or create a new service line. So this is the reason that we're being mobile. And so on the screen is a way to start to categorize and look at mobility data for an organization. And what it's important to know, based on Tom's comment there, is that when we're looking at these mobility patterns in the organization, we need to understand them and document them and use them as evidence so that we can follow those behaviors, or in some cases we can correct those behaviors if the leaders or the managers of those different teams or demographics feel that they're not correct. This is really quite important. So when we study at Work and People Analytics, we study clients' mobility metrics, we show it visually, we measure that, and we do it in a few different ways. We can look at data comparatively, which means we can look at a Department A and a Department B and see how they might compare. And I'm going to show that in just a few slides with live data. And then we can also compare over time. It's also important to say what happens between year 1 and year 3 and how are we changing mobility, because this will give clues as to management changes, technology changes, and how we need to support these departments in our organization that are creating revenue.
It's been very significant, Kevin, has it not, for some WPA clients to either look at the mobility of their organization as a whole, or to be able to look at that by any demographic, whether it be department, different divisions, different geographic or regional locations. Work and People Analytics will show that.
That's exactly right. It's very important to break it down in the organization by department, function, even age groups or tenure groups to see how they're working, because these different teams can learn from each other as to what their best practices are. So the next several slides, we're going to step through an example and look at data of an organization and talk about how mobility affects their ability to create revenue within that organization and what it really means. So most organizations are very much like this in what's shown on the screen. Almost every organization does this. They listen to the marketplace and or their clients for opportunity. So their clients are experiencing problems, they have questions, and they have needs. And some sort of sales force or account representation of the organization says, hey, we have problems here and I think we can solve them. What they do then, and they do that by understanding, we'll get to the mobility in a second, they do that by understanding those clients and moving around and within their marketplace. They then bring those things back generally to the organization where innovation can take place. And innovation does take place everywhere in the organization, but this is what we think of innovation. When people within the organization are working to try and see, can we solve this problem that this client has, and if we can, will it produce revenue for our organization so that we can sustain ourselves and grow as well? After that happens, and if it's decided that yes, we can solve the client's problems, then it's up to the project teams normally to deliver solutions. And they deliver those solutions also by using mobility, which I'm going to share in the next slide. These are 3 fairly important attributes of an organization, and if you think about them in terms of internal and external mobility that we went through just a little bit ago, think of what these teams might look like and how they might differ in their mobility patterns. This particular client was looking to see if they were working properly in their organization. So what they really realized is the opportunity, or the sales force, was looking at client-centered mobility. Again, think of what that looks like. The innovative teams, or the product development and engineering teams, were looking at innovation mobility. And think about what that looks like in terms of internal and external mobilities. And same with the project delivery teams. They're really looking at quality control mobility and these types of things. So who they interact and the degree and volume to which they interact and move around is different. So when we looked at the mobility patterns of this particular organization, we looked at this technology firm in total, but then we started to break down into these different departments within the organization, and you can see them listed here. The client-centered mobility is really the sales force. The innovation components are led by the product management and the engineering teams. And the quality control mobility really is done in project delivery, which is in their organization, the professional services department. Now, next to each of those, we put the total compensation amount for sales, for product management, and professional services. This is important, again, for HR people that are on the call and other leaders to be able to quantify and talk to leaders in your organization in terms of what matters in terms of cost, revenue, production. So you can see the
Kevin, a
differences between,
question.
yeah.
I'm sorry, a question has just come in. Maybe you could talk a little further or explain further about the quantifying the revenue associated with these different departments.
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways to do this. One is much more detailed, and one can be done at a macro level. My background is in finance and as a CPA and a CFO in organizations. And here's how we quantify this normally. We can find out in these different departments what the average employee compensation rate is and multiply that normally by the head count. And in almost every instance, you'll find you'll get extraordinarily close to what the total value is. So this makes information gathering and revealing this evidence very swift. So that's how it was done in this. Another way to do that is to tie the total comp, to ask the finance department, for example, what is the total compensation for each of these different departments in the organization. So that's how that was gathered.
I understand.
You can
Thanks.
you can see the mobility patterns in these departments are very different. In the client-centered mobility, there's an extraordinarily high amount of external mobility, almost 30%. In the product management, or the area that we consider oftentimes the innovation of the organization, there is a high amount of internal mobility. So they're working almost 60% at their desk, but another 30% is really being deployed in and around the office. This is very important to know, and this particular organization was very happy to find that this is what was happening within the organization, because it proved to them why they were becoming more successful in their technology marketplace and able to build more products and services, because their growth was quite exponential. The professional services, as you can see, is a little bit more distributed. So they're working at their desks, moving around the office, but they also have the need for higher client or external mobility, because they need to check on project progress within the clients as well. So they all have different mobility profiles. If we treat them all the same, we're going to miss the mark on aligning resources within these organizations, and we're not going to be able to support each of these teams in the different way that they need to be supported, which is critical to know. One other thing that we do at Work and People Analytics, among assessing several different behaviors, is we look at value networks, or the relationships between these organizations. And I want to show one more point that the client was looking for. They wanted to understand the mobility, but then they wanted to understand the prioritized relationships. And I'm going to show you the prioritized relationships between sales and product management on the next screen. When this organization looked at the value networks, or in short, the relationships that the sales department relies upon, we can show that the sales department was working very closely with the product management team, and that's shown here on this graph. There's a high frequency as designated by the width of the line. There's a high priority because it has a deep, rich color, and that's the way this model is set up. And the interaction between the sales and the product management team is really in person, because it's a blue-gray. If that was orange, it would mean that they were working virtually. This was critical for the organization to see and to understand, because they were concerned that the sales team may not have been conversing enough, working enough with the product management teams to deliver to them the client requests for technology enhancements, technology improvements, and brand new technologies. This, in fact, however, proved out that what was happening was what needed to be happening. The sales team, when they were working in the office, was working very closely with the product management team, and that's exactly what they wanted to see happen. So they continue to find ways to, because of this data, put those teams together, co-locate them so that they can more easily access each other when they're in the office working together. So mobility has a direct effect on our ability to make money in our organization. A friend of mine, William Miller, who runs an organization called Clientcentered Innovation, studies and has studied innovation around the globe for many, many years. And he knows that the only way that innovation really takes place in any organization is the interaction between people. And so mobility becomes increasingly important because it is the human element. It is the thing that the technologies cannot do. Machines cannot innovate the way that people can innovate. They cannot interact. They cannot dialogue to the same extent and in the same way. They certainly can handle transactions and do the things that we need them to do once we realize what the problems are and what the solutions can be. The other thing that people need to do to be mobile is in customer responsiveness. Their ability to dialogue with clients and customers and to dialogue with their entire marketplace, for example, by talking to other industry professionals and people within their marketplace at conferences and trade shows to understand what's happening in their marketplace. The technology gives us the speed and quality control that we need, and so that has a direct impact on our income statement and balance sheet. But what I really want to talk about is these workplaces and how workplaces really, because based on that mobility patterns that I showed you a few screens back, it is clear and evident that there's two very valuable windfalls of budget improvement in organizations, and it relates to real estate. At WPA, we consistently see that organizations need less space than they are currently using. This isn't true in every single case, but in the vast majority of cases, we see organizations that can save annual commercial real estate costs in the range of anywhere from 20 to 40%. And it's not necessarily that they're getting smaller. It has everything to do with getting themselves right and allowing the design of different workplaces that will enhance the ability of internal mobility to work together within the organization. The savings are astronomical for these organizations. So at the same time, if we go back to the very beginning and understand that we need to document our mobility, it starts to make the case for us to make changes throughout the organization in terms of people, in terms of technology, and in terms of place. And when we have that kind of savings in commercial real estate, which is normally one of the top 3 expenses in an organization, normally the second largest expense in the organization, that savings is big, whether you're a small company or a Fortune 500 company. So something that we want to talk about now is documenting mobility. And this is where, at the very beginning, I said, this is so simple, and it needs to be done and done on a consistent basis. Documenting mobility in an organization is easy to do and needs to be done because it's really a simple question or a simple task to look at various data points. A way on your screen to do that is in annual surveys or in surveys that you make up on your own to be able to look at how an organization is working, is to ask the respondents where they're getting their work done and put them in the context of focusing on work and their outputs first. But then you can customize those responses. And when you look at an entire team or an organization of hundreds or even thousands of people, you will bubble up and be able to see the various differences and the mobility patterns in the organization. This is where some of this data can come from. Other instances where this data can come from are directly off of timesheets dependent upon the HR system, and still others through using macro data. For example, in larger organizations, it can gather badge data about people's internal and external mobility in offices. What really needs to be understood is that if we're not documenting our mobility, we really have an opportunity there to document that mobility, and then we have evidence to have our seat at the table at the highest levels of the organization to share why change is happening and how we need to best support the workforce in order to create greater revenue and value in the organization. And with that, I'd like to launch our second question, if we can. Stephen and Tom.
Yeah. So our second poll question is open and should be live now. Does your organization regularly measure the mobility patterns of its teams or key demographics? Just a yes or no question. And pretty quickly we're seeing, Kevin, that about 100% of our respondents are answering no. So we'll leave that open for another moment, but I don't expect that to change. We can probably close that and move on. 100%.
Well, that's a terrific opportunity then. And again, because mobility is the very human component of what we're doing in our work, I would say, and I would contend that when we look at the different work behaviors, and work and people analytics looks at several different types of behaviors, I think this mobility patterns is the easiest and the most actionable one right away, because we can follow it chronologically over a period of time. We can look at it comparatively between different departments, functions, and age groups, and many other things. And it provides the evidence that's going to lead to an ROI on support systems, such as those technology or those workplace requirements that an organization needs. For people in private industry, Tom, it also allows them the evidence that they need to be able to guide people, for example, who are serving them in terms of commercial real estate, technology, or other consulting practices. So the value of just documenting over a period of time, team by team, the mobility patterns is extraordinary, and it's just sitting there waiting for everyone to grab.
Yeah, it's interesting and important. Just to be fair, Kevin, 70% of our attendees voted. It did change slightly. It was 92% no, but 8% yes. So some are, but like you said, huge opportunity.
Wonderful. So we're nearing the end of our time together this month, and we look forward to next month, where we're going to talk about work activities and whether or not we need people. But I'm curious, Tom, if we have, and Stephen, if we have some additional questions with the remaining 2 minutes that we have. Well, if there are no remaining questions, then this will we will close out our webinar for this month. It's been great to share this with everyone, and hopefully you're left with a little bit of information, and we want to hear back from you as well, whether or not this was helpful to you. So at the end, I believe, as you leave, there's going to be a quick question about the value of this webinar to you. And as you recall, our next webinar is going to be on work activities on Thursday, August 17th at the same time, 10 a.m. Central Time. And the question we're really going to answer and dive into some very specific data is, do you really need more people in your organization? Attraction and retention is very important these days, but we want to talk about, do we really need more people, or do we just need to organize ourselves better and more economically within our organization and essentially get less or get more with less? So thank you for participating. Tom, anything to close out?
Great information, Kevin. Thanks for reminding everyone to sign up for our series of webinars. The next one will be August 17th, as you mentioned. If anyone would like more information about work and people analytics, please reach out and let us know. And at the close of the broadcast, a quick 2-question survey asking for your feedback or asking about future topics which may be of interest to you will be launched, so we'd love your feedback there. Thank you, everyone, very much for making time to join us today, and have a pleasant rest of your week.
Great. Thank you very much. You're welcome.